We here at the Sports History Network proudly partner with 26 podcasts, all revolving around the history of sports. But did you know that many of our hosts were sports history authors way before they started their shows? It's true. We've got Joe Ziemba, host of When Football Was Football, Joe Zagurski, host of Pro Football in the 1970s, Mark Morthier, host of Yesterday's Sports, Tommy Phillips, host of Lombardi Memories, and Scott Adamson, co-host of From the 55-Yard Line. All these authors have many books for you to choose from. To check them out, go to our website at sportshistorynetwork.com/sportshistorybooks. Pick up your copy today. Soundtrack provided by Kevin MacLeod of filmmusic.io.
Hello, sports fans, and welcome to another edition of Yesterday Sports on the Sports History Network. Today, along with my co-hosts Vinny, Lospinuso, and Dave DePaola, we are going to discuss the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
The time that I went was just to go to see the Hall of Fame. There was nothing going on there. And I had some other guys that played football with me who they said, you got to go to the Hall of Fame. So we drove out, and it's 12 hours about from where I live. And so we would do the same thing every time we would go out. We would leave about 10, 11 o'clock at night. We would get there about 10 in the morning, 9, 10 in the morning. Then we would sleep for a few hours, and then we would get up. And the thing, Vinny and Mark and everyone, the Cooperstown, Canton is small. And so when I first started going, there was only so many places you could go where they were having these Hall of Fame parties, so to speak, where they would have like the play. And so it was easy access. You could get to anybody. And I'll show you. I have some of the pictures, but you could get to any guy you wanted to get to. I mean, it wasn't even a problem. I mean, we were meeting all these guys. It was phenomenal. And there was one place called the Park Hotel. That's where everything was going on. So it was very simple. Hey, let's go over there and we'll get these guys as they're arriving or when they're leaving and everything else. But the Hall of Fame itself, Vinny, I think if he can get you those passes, you go during the ceremony. It's gotten to be very, very big. I mean, there was a stadium on the side. It was called Fawcett Field. It was nothing. It maybe held 8,000 people, if that, at the time. I don't even think it, but if that. Now they have the ceremonies in there, and it's good. It's good to go see it. It's packed with people now, but you know what? If you haven't been there, you'll get a big thrill out of it. Really, back then the ceremonies were right on the front steps, and so I had a lot of good camera equipment at the time. I had a ton of Nikon equipment, and I would bring one little monopod so I wouldn't be in anybody's way. And I would just set it up in front of me, and I got some great shots. And then they moved it to the stadium, and it got a little less. I don't know what the word is.
It changed a lot.
Yes,
they moved it to
lost a lot of charm. Put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It lost its. How do I say? It lost its secreteness, I guess you can say. Like,
absolutely.
It was when it was on the front steps. They would put this massive tarp up because I think it's 77 runs right past. I forgot. There was a pretty major highway that runs right across the hall, and they would put it up to block a lot of the noise from the trucks. But you would hear truckers with the horn going by, and the ceremonies were going on right on the front steps. And if they ran really long, in fact, it happened, Mark, when Randy White got in. He's talking, and all of a sudden you hear the announcer.
Right.
So the Hall of Fame game he's introducing players that were just standing on the front steps, and now they're walking into the stadium because the festivities are starting. So while one guy's trying to give his speech, there's the announcer from the stadium, and you can hear him in the back. I have a lot of videotape from those Hall of Fame things.
That sounds awesome.
It's absolutely insane. But this would never happen today.
Oh, no.
Here's a guy who's going to the Hall of Fame, and some guy is speaking over him. Well, that's what kind of gave it a...
Today's climate, that would never happen.
When Dan Deerdorf was inducted, he was talking about Dick Butkus, the first time he had to go up against Dick Butkus, And just as he was talking about Dick Butkus, one of those big trucks went by and blew their horn. And he said that's exactly how it sounded when Dick Butkus was coming. That's what the sound was when Dick Butkus was coming at me.
Oh, God. Oh, my God. I want to tell you, I can't get over the fact that all the truck horns going by while giving it's it sounds more ramshackle, but it almost sounds more, I guess, intimate in a sense. It sounds a bit more, organic. It feels less synthetic. It feels way more natural. So I'm down for that. That sounds hilarious a little bit, but also really, really cozy, I could argue. Because you're right there, everyone I've seen, like all the steps right by it. It almost feels like I'm walking in the Hall of Fame. This is what I'm like. Here is my bus before you bring it within the entry. And, it's not right by, I guess, how would I describe it? Like the orange, juicer. Is that what people call the top part of it?
That's the original building, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. The original building was that orange juicer. So when you go in there, when you go this summer or fall, you'll walk in and there'll be a spiral staircase, and right in the middle of it is Jim Thorpe. And you go up. I mean, and then they've built at least 2 or 3 other buildings onto this building.
Wow.
They have a theater in there now. That was never there. And that's good to see. There's pictures. Except the buses have their own room. And that's pretty good. Then you'll have a display for each team and the guys that are in there for that team. It's pretty impressive. There's a guy that lives on my street. You're not going to believe this, but it popped in my head with Jim Thorpe. But there was a guy that lived about 3 streets up from me, and his name was Eddie Keenan. But we were young kids. Mm-hmm. We had a paper routes. And he lived in this house, and the woman's name was Grady.
Grady.
Okay, we didn't know. We were just 11 or 12 years old. We didn't really get it. That was his sister.
Oh.
And Grady, she was a customer of my buddy, my best friend Frank DeVino. And so we knew the house as Grady. It had a G on the front door, on the screen on the front. There would be like those metal things with the G or whatever, H, whatever your initial was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But this guy was roaming around in the yard for years. This was going on, probably three years at least. And he was a very large guy. And he was very bow-legged. And he had a white tank top on with shorts. And he would mow the lawn. So one day we sit down with him. He's telling us he played professional football for the Hartford Blues. And he played against Jim Thorpe in 1926. And he played against Red Grange. They both played in that year. And his name was Eddie Keenan. You can look him up. It was called Eddie Bull Keenan. There is something on him. He's actually in a book that I ordered, and I gave it to my buddy Hubbard, who was down there with me. And he was a big football guy. And I said, "You're not going to believe it." I said, "I found the book, and Eddie Keenan his name is mentioned in there." And we didn't get it at the time. We were only 11 or 12 years old. Like, we weren't understanding we weren't grasping it. And we knew he was a big guy. Then I looked him up. 6'4", 320 pounds. He was the largest guy that played in that entire decade of the 20s, from 1920 to 1930. And at this point, he was in his mid-70s. He lived to be 84. But we still talk about it to this day, me and my buddies, how he was there, like just right here in our neighborhood.
He was from Waterbury.
He was from Waterbury. It even says it, born in Waterbury. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Waterbury, born in Waterbury, died in Waterbury.
There you go. You got it pulled up already. This guy's quick on the computer, Mark. He's not like you and me. The show would be over. We wouldn't be able to pull it in.
He played for 10 games in 1926 for the Hartford Blues. And he was number 25. Played guard.
Unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And, here he is mowing the lawn. We just didn't get it. We just didn't. But now we appreciate it more now that we're, me and my buddies are in our 60s. Mm-hmm. So, it's like it's a crazy,
It's incredible.
But when I mentioned Jim Thorpe being in the stairwell there, it just popped in my head. Eddie Keenan played against him,
That's incredible. What other places like besides? I hear that they had some new expansions. Like I know that back when Baker was in charge, he wanted to have the whole Hall of Fame village. But from what Paul has told me, one of my friends, he's from Ohio. Oh, he doesn't. He's not from Ohio. He's actually from. I think he's from Hamilton, Ontario originally, but he now lives in Ohio. He was telling me how. Or Burlington, either one of those two. But he was telling me how they plan to have a whole Hall of Fame village with all these hotels and restaurants and all these other accoutrements. But from my understanding, not as much really got done. I know that the expansion of the stadium put forward by Tom Benson did happen, obviously. But what else really happened besides that?
Do you know, Mark?
I haven't been there. I haven't been there in 18 years. So, but just from the first time I went, I went 5 years in a row. My first time was in 2000. But that wasn't for the induction ceremonies. That was just to visit the museum. And then the following year, 2001, they still had it on the front steps, like you were talking about, Dave. The inductions were on the front steps, and I wasn't really prepared. I didn't realize how accessible the players were going to be. I was walking. I got to the museum early in the morning, like as soon as it opened. I got into the museum, and there was hardly anybody there. It was like a ghost town. And all of a sudden, I see Nick Bonacani, and he's with his son. His son was in the wheelchair, and they're walking up the hallway, and there's like nobody around. It's just, and I wasn't prepared. I didn't have my camera or anything. And here's Nick Bonacani heading right towards me. But so then I went back to the hotel. I got my camera, and I got a lot of good pictures. But then the following year, I think, was the first year they had it at the stadium. And each year that I went, it got harder and harder to get pictures with the player. They weren't as accessible now because it seemed like it all changed when they went to the stadium. When they left the front steps and went to the stadium, the players weren't as accessible. And just in those 5 years, there was a lot of expanded. Like each year I went back, you could see they were expanding it more and more. So by now, I would imagine it's really, really got to be built up.
Mm-hmm. It's way more like an event that way more people get on and try to get more attention. And just in general, it's a way larger event, way more social media posts, way more attention, way more traffic, way more views. Period. Yeah. Just way more. And in terms of it being a business, it really does work. It has helped out. It has increased the profile. I think USA Today even ranked it as like the best, sports museum in America, which is pretty incredible. Not going to lie.
Oh yeah, it's an amazing museum.
Vinny, you sound like you're up on a lot of stuff. What happened to David Baker? Something happened.
Yeah,
there's something else going on behind the official story, I think.
Yes, it came out the same time as John Gruden was forced out of the Raiders. So some of my friends were actually speculating if this had anything to do with maybe there were some let's say bad emails found of him to get dirt to try to get stuff away from Dan Snyder. Turned out that was not the case. He said he was retiring, but they said he was still being used in a capacity, which didn't really make much sense to me. So I did a little more digging, and it turned out there was actually a lot of issues behind the scenes because Baker promised that there would be way more expansion, really growing out the Hall of Fame Village with Johnson Controls. In fact, Johnson Controls, I could be wrong about this, but I think they were even considering maybe even leaving the plan just because of how much stagnation there's been. And the village is still going to happen, but it's going to be way less than what was originally planned. And that screws over a lot of taxpayers, from my understanding. A lot of taxpayers, especially people around the area, were promised a lot more, and they're more than likely not going to get what they expected. So that's not going to be good. So, and that's why Jim Porter's there instead. He's coming with a business mind, maybe to see if the village is going to work out. If not, we'll see what their next plan of action is. That's what I've heard.
Was it Joe Horrigan? He was there before Baker. And I think that was his name. He's still involved somehow.
No. Yes and no. Horrigan has been involved with the Pro Football Hall of Fame for several decades. In terms of the guy that was running it, it was Stephen Perry that was running it before David Baker. Steve Perry, not the former singer of Journey. I should know that because my dad is a diehard Journey fan. He has like 50 CDs and listens. He say, "Hey, Vincent, Neil Sean played at the NBA Finals opening game. Why didn't you tell me?" He said, "Because I was focused on the game itself, Dad." I was saying that to him. But yeah, Stephen Perry was running it. There were several other guys before. I was just really thinking about Steve Perry because he was the one that came before Baker. His son, played for the Falcons. He was, okay as a player. I think he was a lineman, if I'm not mistaken, or a linebacker. Either way, and he was also the commissioner of the Arena Football League for a while. I think like 15, maybe almost 20 years for the AFL. And, he took up the job, a few years later to become, the head of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I would probably argue their most famous head president of the Pro Football Hall of Fame because he was always way more out there. He spoke a lot more. He was the one knocking on the door. His larger-than-life presence also got the eye of many people. We'd always joke in our threads that, he's coming. Here he come with a knock on the door. I said, man, that reminds me of my middle school principal, Dr. Dan Markwood, actually. That's just me personally. But he always kind of reminded me of that larger-than-life figure who's always very happy. But, people behind the scenes felt a bit more mixed about him. They saw him as more attention-grabbing. They saw him as a bit more, more about the show and not about the game itself. I would disagree with that. He cared very much about the game. Of course, he's been involved with it for many years with the arena side and the professional side. But I'm curious what his future role with the organization is going to be, and I'm really excited to see what Porter's going to do. But that's what I know about, David Baker in terms of why he decided to retire. It's less so retiring, more so like he was kind of pushed out almost.
I thought there was something to that, Mark. But I didn't keep up on it. Just kind of passed me by. I got a shot here of that original building from the. So here's a shot I took. Yeah. After I got done with whatever I was doing, I went to the back of and they used to have that tarp up in the front, that big thing to keep because let me tell you, every time I went there, it was so hot. And I thought Connecticut was brutal, but it was always hot and always humid. Yeah. And that thing would shade some of the players and some of the guys. And so that was kept probably a little, even if it was a 10-degree difference, that was kind of a big thing. But the crowds, it was great. It was that when it was on the in that building. And then this was 92. A friend of mine, he's a huge Raider fan, my buddy Ray, one of my best friends. And Al Davis was getting inducted, and we said, we're going to go down, because he would go on my trips if a Cowboy was going, so I would go on his trips if there was a Raider. So nice. And they go, you'll never get Al Davis to sign anything. You'll never get Al Davis to take a picture with you. So we were in the lobby. He came in, and we said, Al, we met you down in Dallas for in 86. He came right over. We said, we're from Waterbury, Connecticut. He says, I know. He says, the town with the clocks. We knew there was Lux Time. Timex was here. And so he came right over. I got a picture of my buddy Ray with Al Davis there. Wow. And he was very nice that night. And I had a ball, one of those footballs. And I said, Ray, while you're taking pictures with these guys, just hand them the ball while you're taking it. They'll sign it. And so I told you, we got about 4. Here's Ted Hendricks. There's Ted Hendricks with Ray. He was about 6'7", Ted Hendricks. Yeah, he was. And my buddy Ray's got the ball in his hand there. You can see it. Yeah. And so I got this ball with like 35 Raider signatures on it. Wow. I should actually give it to Ray because I don't even really care about it. And then we got everybody I think knows this guy here. We got Madden. Madden came. Madden was pretty nice. We got a picture with Madden, and he was very nice.
He almost looks a little bit. He almost looks a little surprised to be taking that picture. He's like,
yeah. I mean, I had a great camera. I had a Nikon camera with a Mets flash. Wow. And so I had a lot of professional equipment. And I think I told Arnie on the first time I was on with him, I had a bunch of press passes made, and they never failed, Arnie. maybe, I don't know today, everything's so tight, but I could tell you up until easily probably 2018, 2015, right around there, 2018, never had a problem with anybody. My picture on them, the this, that, and I had 4 or 5 different ones, and they always worked. So we always got in, like, pretty much, where we ever wanted. Here's a shot for you, Mark. You'll appreciate this. Ben Davidson.
Oh, yeah.
Great Ben Davidson.
Oh, wow.
And my buddy Ray was in his glory. This was a big night. One guy was so impressed, he took us right into the party.
Whoa. Wow.
They had this massive ice sculpture of a Raider shield, and everybody was in there. Al did, and here's a picture with there's Daryl LaMonica, Mark.
Oh, rest in peace.
That's a good.
Yeah, he just passed away kind of.
Yeah,
recently,
he just died.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Daryl LaMonica. I don't know if you guys are getting a glare on these, but
No, I can see him.
here's one of my favorites, Pete Banaszak. Nobody even knew he was the running back. That's me with him. We corralled him out in the parking lot. And that's what I said, Mark. I said, Pete? Whoever hit you the hardest? He says, my wife. That's what he said. So, we still talk about that, me and my buddy Ray. And here's a classic. Here's me and this was Sid Gilman showed up for this event because he was tight with Al Davis.
Sid Gilman showed up to this one?
He was so proud that we knew who he was. Nobody was even near the guy. And he was so proud that we knew who he was. He had his hand around my waist. You could see it. He was pulling me close. He was so proud of it. Me and my buddy Ray, we got pictures with him.
Yeah,
Sid Gilman. Yeah.
That's a
that
nice
man.
That was a good night.
That man had a coaching tree of the ages.
It's true. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody's could top that.
No one can, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah, give me some guys that stemmed off that tree. I forgot.
I'm looking at it right now. For Sid Gilman's tree, right afterwards you had, Al Davis, Don Coryell, Dirk Vermeil, Chuck Knoll, George Allen. Then afterwards you had John Madden, Joe Gibbs, Tony Dungy, Bill Walsh, Art Shell, Tom Flores, Mike Holmgren, Jim Fossil, Paul Hackett, Sam Weish, George Seifert, Dennis Green, Jeff Fisher, Mike Shanahan, Andy Reid, Steve Mariucci, Mike Sherman, John Gruden, this tree is so massive. And for some of these, people talk about, Dungy's coaching tree or Greed's coaching tree or a Holmgren's coaching tree, but all those go all the way back to Gilman. Gilman is literally like the head root on the main trunk and everything else. Yeah, you may have some big branch here and there, but where does the branch go? The big branch goes into the main trunk itself, and the main trunk itself is that of Sid Gilman.
Yes. Those first 5 names were staggering. Coryell, remember Eric Coryell, Mark?
Oh, yeah. That guy should be in the Hall of Fame. He's someone that my friend Mike, he's a huge Chargers fan. He really, really wants Coryell. And even though he never grew up for it, he said, he changed the way, passing was. And of course, he was the mentor of Bill Walsh. You argue that there would be no Bill Walsh, it would not be for Don Coryell. No, that's just a relatively recent person. There's many others too. I'm a big Buddy Parker guy. I'm a big, Clark Shaughnessy person. But I'm just mentioning Coryell as he is part of Gilman's coaching tree.
I got a couple pictures. I got a couple pictures here. This one is let's see. Can you see that?
Yes.
That's my son when he was young with Mel Renfro.
Wow.
And this one is my son with Ron Yari. I don't know if you could tell in this picture, he actually took off his Hall of Fame ring and let my son put it on his
imagine finger. That?
Yep.
How big was that finger on your son's finger? How big was that ring on your son's finger?
Well, you see, he had to close his hand so it wouldn't fall off. It was huge. It was a huge.
Those are huge fingers too. They're like twice the size of mine. That's that's the size of my big toe almost. Just as pinky looks at.
Yeah. And here's these I'm very proud of. This is me with John Mackey.
Oh,
the tight
legend.
end.
Tight end.
Tremendous.
I'm very proud of those. I'm glad I got those because I actually almost.
He's one of your favorites. He's one of your favorites, Mark.
That's right. And that was the final year that I went, 2004. And like I said, each year it got harder and harder to get pictures with the player. So there was this hordes of fans, they were getting smothered. The players were getting smothered. So it was very difficult to even get near them. So I was getting disgusted. I was ready to leave.
Those collection things where people collected cards and people collected, guys would show up and want guys to sign 10 cards.
Right.
It would be like, get the heck out of here, will you? You get you want one card or something for yourself, but they know what you're up to. You're gonna keep a card. You're gonna sell the other 9. It got crazy.
Right.
And just like anything else, some stuff. Once something turns you off, like that started turning me off to things.
It turned me off as well.
Yes, it really rubbed me the wrong way, and it just we had a lot of great. I mean, I took my brother with me. My brother, who worked at the ice cream shop with me at the time, and we were roaming. And then all of a sudden we're walking across. This was when you could actually go right down into the field. We're walking across the field, and we run into Chris Berman.
Whoa!
And we said, Mr. Berman, how are you? We're from Waterbury. Chris Berman's from Cheshire, Connecticut.
Right.
And Cheshire's 10 minutes from my town. And he goes, oh, my God. And you know something? I had this picture hanging up in the ice cream shop. I had tons of pictures hanging up in there. Probably, Mark knows, 80, 90, 100 pictures of different players. And,
wow.
And I sent this picture to Berman to give it to him. And I said, thanks for talking. Well, he spent about 10, 15 minutes with us. And he actually signed it and sent it back and said 2 Hall of Famers. And so here's a picture of my brother Paul and I. We were down on the field the day before the game with Chris Berman.
Wow.
And his so that was pretty, we got a big kick out of that. And he knew exactly. And the funny thing about it is a buddy of mine, big cowboy guy, he moved to Hawaii. And I think I talked about this, Arnie, on the first time I was on with you. And I didn't tell you about Berman, though. Berman owns a house in Hawaii.
Whoa.
And my buddy Tom would see him at church on Sundays. And and he knew my buddy Tom was from Naugatuck, Connecticut. And Chris Berman, if you look him up, got his start in Naugatuck, Connecticut on a local radio station here. And so whenever he would see my buddy Tom, he'd say, hey, Naugatuck, how you doing? He forgot his name, but I talk to my buddy Tom like once a month now. Well, during football season, we'll talk once a week, but he moved to Hawaii in 2008. And he goes, oh, there's a lot of guys. He would talk to me. There's a lot of guys come out on vacation out here. A lot of players and this and that. Willie Nelson has a house out there. And Berman was one of the guys. So Chris Berman's got a house out here. We see a very nice guy. Here's a shot with me with Bud Grant, the great Viking coach.
Also, great Winnipeg Blue Bombers coach, too. Don't forget.
That's right.
Yes. And a professional basketball and football player. Arnie, I think I sent you that little thing about Bud Grant, who I thought gave one of the greatest speeches at the Hall of Fame I've ever heard. He was talking about when he went to see he lived in Minnesota, and his father was a big sports fan, Bud Grant's father, and he would take him to the training camp. I think the New York Giants were training in Minnesota. I'm not sure it could be the 40s. I think it was. You could look it up. I think it was Superior maybe, or one of those towns up there. Bud Grant's father, and they would meet the coach of the Giants, and he said, my son's going to play for you one day. Every year they would measure him up a little bigger, a little taller, And he eventually, he says, his father was deceased when he got into the Hall of Fame, but his mother was still alive. And towards the end of the speech, he said, if my mother were here today, she would look at us. She would look at me with the pride that only a mother could have. He said, if my father were here, he would stand up and he would say, the kid made it. He finally made it. And he was pulling out a complete rag out of his pocket, not even a hanky. And he was wiping his face. It was tremendous. Probably one of the best speeches I ever heard.
Jeez, talk about the emotions of that moment. My God,
it was unbelievable. And probably the craziest speech was probably John Riggins. I was there for John Riggins. I don't know what the hell he was talking about. He was talking about the law of the Yukon, and he was probably him, and also Ted Hendricks, who I believe, and I'm not even kidding. I swear to God, I don't drink. I never drank in my life. Ted Hendricks was drunk at the Hall of Fame. I'm convinced of it. I mean, this guy, even my buddy Ray was saying something's wrong. It doesn't sound right.
Could that be an old, I don't know, Guatemalan tradition or something like that?
I don't know what it was, but if you could hear the speech, and he wasn't talking too kindly about somebody, and I think it was the commissioner at the time.
Oh.
I don't remember his speech, but I was looking at my buddy Ray, and I was like, what the heck is going on? This is kind of insane a little. But he was the Mad Stork, Ted Hendricks. And let's see, I just got a few more. This is my angle from kind of where I used to stand in the crowd. So this was a shot I took of Randy White up at the podium. So I was getting fairly close to these, and I wasn't even using too much of a zoom lens. But that was him up at the podium. That was when they were having it right in front of the Hall of Fame at the time.
He looks
and
tired.
Here's one. I was able to walk right up and get a shot of the busts.
Yeah.
And there, that's how close I was able to get. But those were, it was very intimate. That was the word I was looking for before.
Intimate. Very intimate.
Yeah.
Very intimate
Mark,
experience.
Yes, exactly, Vinny. You're going to like this one, Mark.
Oh, is that Jackie Smith, right? Jackie Smith.
Who's better than Mark? Yeah, Jackie Smith. And here's another one, Mark. You'll like this one. It's me and Gil Brandt.
Gil Brandt. Yep.
Yeah, the guy's still alive.
Yeah.
I want him
Go
so
ahead,
badly.
Vinny. He's still active, right?
He's still active. He's still working for NFL.com. He's still doing, he's still working on there. He's still giving, radio calls. He's still hosting shows on that dude is such an ambassador for the game, for being a pioneer, for bringing technology into the world of scouting and helping create a legendary Cowboys team that was dominant for 30 years. It's just remarkable. Granted, he had time with the Niners and the Rams as well, but he's a Cowboy first and foremost. And as much as I was happy with, Pat Bowlen because all the fans wanted him, I was especially happy for Gil Brandt because I felt like not enough people really gave him credit. And a lot of people just said, oh, he's only in because of the media. No. Way more than just that. When you bring technology into it and literally changes the game, I'm going to be someone always on board because I'm very, as I've talked with Arnie, I'm someone that's very progressive in that field, big with, technological advancements in society itself. And that looks like a dream come true. I would love to have my picture with Gil Brandt personally.
He was a very nice guy too. He didn't shine you on or talk like, he just took some heat though for that thing with the guy that got killed, right?
Yeah, Dwayne Haskins. But to be fair, even in that situation, I understand where he was coming from because Dwayne Haskins did have some issue. Turns out he was apparently he had alcohol on him. He was on ketamine or something like that he was on.
That's a big one today. Yep.
Scary, just absolutely scary and very sad situation all around for Dwayne Haskins.
Yep, he was a very, very, very cordial guy. You could go right up to him and talk. Yeah. He was great, Mark.
I know.
Vinny knows, Mark. Not too many people know about Gil Brandt.
Yeah.
I'm very surprised.
Vinny knows his stuff.
Yeah, I do.
How old are you, Vinny?
I'm going to be 23 on June 30th.
Oh, that,
Are you kidding me?
There's no
I'm
one.
not even joking. I'm not joking. I'm not even 23 yet.
There's no one that age. No one that age that knows their history like that. So that's
unbelievable.
That's impressive.
Absolutely staggering.
I know. I wanted Gil Brandt back when I was in college. I was a huge Gil Brandt guy. I was talking about, even back then, I said, oh, I want these old pre-NFL guys. Like, I said I want Duke Slater was someone I really wanted from there, and no one knew who Duke Slater was. Like, who's Duke Slater? I said, well, it's a guy I want. He's the first ever black lineman in the NFL. I said, what? And then my friend Eddie told me, I said, hey, congrats, Vinny. You got your boy Duke Slater in finally.
That's unbelievable.
Okay.
That's crazy, Mark.
Mm-hmm.
So let's hear your. I know you two guys have a long list of players you'd like to see in the Hall of Fame. I'm a little more, what would you call it, exclusive. Like, I'm not sure I'm a fan of putting everyone in the Hall of Fame. Like, a lot of guys have lists that just go on and on. At what point, where do we stop? It's almost like there has to be a tier 1 and a tier 2 now. I mean, when you took, guys like Bob Lilly, Jim Brown, Dick Butkus, I'll throw in Barry Sanders because Arnie's here. Those guys you don't even have to think about. That's just automatic. Yeah. They're in.
Yeah.
But then you have tier 2 where, you have to think, does this guy belong in? And I mean, there has to be a limit each year to how many guys you can put in. I hear a lot of fans, I want this guy in, I want that guy. Well, where does it end? I think you have to have a limit each year to how many guys you can put in.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would never, even though I'm someone that likes a lot of people, and I would never be the kind of person that says, oh, just put them all in at once, because that just would not make a lot of sense from a business perspective. Forget exclusivity. Just from a business perspective, it would not be very interesting, because if you get them all at once, okay, you're not going to have any buildup for the next time. You gotta have some guys off, so that way it keeps it interesting.
Right.
But for me in particular, as I've told Arnie, even though I do like talking about players, I've always been much more of a contributor individual. I'm the kind of guy that's into, for instance, the executive, the general manager, the owner, for instance, or, the inventor, all these more relatively niche parts. But to me, way much more significant, because sometimes their impact is much larger than just playing the game.
That's true. Did George Young ever get in?
George Young made it in 2020. He made it this. He was along with two other contributors, if I recall. Paul Tagliabue was among them, as well as Steve Sable. I told Arnie, for a Mount Rushmore, and they said, Vinny, if you had a Mount Rushmore of 4 contributors you would have want, which 4 would you go with? And I went with a very easy 4. Oliver David Thompson, or O.D. Thompson. He's the man that made American football professionalized back in the 1892 for the Allegheny Athletics Association, part of the Western Pennsylvania Professional Football Circuit. Very huge, significant name. Ralph Hay, of course, he's the one that made the NFL what it was in 1920 when he organized all the owners together, and the NFL was born. But I also threw in 2 other names that were a little bit more off the road, not exactly ones you would think of, but thinking about it very concisely, it actually makes a lot of sense. Wilfred Winkenbach, he was a minority owner of the Raiders in the early 1960s when they were part of the AFL, and he was significant as he was the one that created fantasy football. And now that institution is so massive for the NFL's growth, as well as the game itself, it rakes in billions and billions and billions of dollars every year. In fact, in some situations, the worth of of fantasy football might even be larger than the NFL itself in some areas. And another one I threw in there for my 4th guy was Trip Hawkins. That's the founder of Electronic Arts. And Electronic Arts, the video game studio, they created the Madden games, and that's very significant because along with, the game itself and fantasy football, the Madden games are the 3 pillars to the NFL's, growth. Those are the 3 main areas that they focus on: the game itself, the Madden games, and fantasy football. And they focus on those 3 areas. And I feel like you need to have, if you're going to focus on those other 2 areas, you got to focus on Winkenbach, the one that made fantasy football itself, the one that really brought in all these other casual people into the game and grew it up that way. And Hawkins, the man that brought it to all newer generations and also made game playing itself much more interesting, much more engaging with, fans and audience members and everything. Like, it made people also want to become coaches because of the Madden games. So those, I know that, they're not ones that a lot of people talk of. 1, 2 were way before my grandparents were even born. And, the other 2 are ones that I guess you could say are a little bit, newer age thinking, but I like to balance it out a little bit. What do you guys think?
Let me just say I think baseball does a much better job of picking Hall of Famers, if you want to get down to who should be in and who shouldn't be in. I just think it's much more exclusive. Especially in the last 10 years in football. I mean, there's guys that are getting in, and you're like when this guy was playing, when I said his name, it never dawned on me that he was going to be a Hall of Famer. Never mind even a first ballot Hall of Famer, some of them. Some of them are getting into the first ballot, okay?
Yeah, crazy.
Like what's his name there that played for Miami?
Jason Taylor.
He's a first ballot Hall of Famer?
I was shocked by that myself.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I tell him right here if he walked in my front door, sorry, buddy, you were great. Not a first ballot Hall of Famer, okay? I got no problem with saying it to him.
Yeah, he wouldn't mind. He'll have a smile on his face and said, "Okay, what are you going to do about it?"
Nothing. I'm not going to take you out of there. Nobody is, but something. I just I don't. There's a lot of other guys too that I just say, geez,
yeah,
and you look over the list and you go, this guy's in the Hall of Fame. You even forget about it that some of these guys are in.
Yeah.
And they've passed some of the old timers.
Yeah, I've sad about that too. And not just like for your guys' generation. I think of like all the other generations. Like I was telling Arnie before, one of my most wanted players, Laverne Dilwig, played for the Packers. He was essentially their Don Hudson before Don Hudson. The man was the best end of the 1920s, but the reason why he gets overlooked because you had Don Hudson there, and because those Lambeau Packers teams, the 20s and 30s, were just so dominant that in a sense, if you put them all in, it could it would be too much. But I would just say, even for Dilwig, a man that he's been on 6 all-decade teams. He's been 6 different organizations put him on as part of their all-decade team. 8 all-pros, that's someone I really want. And I feel bad for even his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren that they don't even realize how great their flesh and blood was back in the day. And I almost feel kind of bad. I feel see a lot of people just push for who they grew up with or someone that they like, but I'm saying it kind of feels a little selfish if you're just thinking about your era. I'm someone that likes to think about everyone because I care about people my own age, but also care about the people that came before me.
Right. Well, like you were saying, those guys from the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, they easily get forgotten about because football just wasn't that popular back then. Baseball was the main game, and college football was much more popular than pro football. So, the guy you just mentioned, most people would say, "Who? I never even heard of him," because it just wasn't popular at that time.
Yeah, I think of an analogy similar to when JJ Redick was saying how Bob Cousy just played with firemen and plumbers, and Cousy responded and saying, I play with Bill Russell and Will Chamberlain and everyone else. So if we play with plumbers and firemen, we probably play with the best plumbers and firemen on the damn planet. I see it the same way here because a lot of people think of just people from those previous generations just they were inferior, they just played on cow fields. No, man, it's not like that. They were tougher than you could ever be.
Yep.
I mean, you could say, Mark. I think. Look, these guys that say, well, these Hall of Famers from the '60s and '70s, which is kind of our era, no, they couldn't play. Look, if a guy's a Hall of Famer, if they had the training and the stuff that goes on today, they'd actually be better than some of these modern guys.
Yeah, I'd say
they had more football. They may not be the athlete that these guys are, but they were football players. These guys could play football. Okay, these guys today don't even want to tackle. Please,
they had to go to work during the off season. Those guys had to go to work during the off season.
Yeah, they were selling insurance.
They
did other things.
Football wasn't their only job. They like I was saying for Dilwig, that was not his only profession. He was doing numerous other jobs, and that was the case for most of those people, especially before the merger. That was not the reason why you never see a Bo Jackson or something like that today. Because back then you had multiple people that played multiple sports, multiple jobs. Like George Howells played for the Yankees even for a bit of the time. All these people had to have multiple jobs just to have an income. Football was just one little part of it. But now your entire career could be based on just, one thing, in this case, athletics. That was not the case many years ago.
No.
So I wish that more people put that in consideration.
That's true. Chuck Bednarik drove a concrete truck. That's how he got his nickname. He drove a concrete truck during the season, not just in the off season.
Yeah,
that's good.
Bob people just thought he was because he was up, but no, he ran a whole. He was operating the concrete truck.
Yeah, during the season.
One thing that gets lost in Hall of Fame voting is, everybody. The first thing somebody does when they look up a Hall of Famer, what they're going to look up is stats. But just from watching football and playing football for a long period of time too, and just getting to know some of the players, actually, like, unless you've actually watched a guy play, there could be a guy with average stats, but he was a real gamer. You could say, Mark, Drew Pearson comes to mind in that. Nothing like the stats that a receiver would have today, but this guy made the biggest catches in the biggest games. And unless you were watching it, you just look at his stats and go, this guy's very average. In fact, by today's standards, he's way below average. But not when you watched him. You'd have to really watch certain guys from certain eras. And then they could go, there's really no measuring stick. Although if you're going to be selected to go into the Hall of Fame, you should be dominant at your position for at least half your career.
Yep.
So if you played 10 years, you should have been dominant player for at least 5 years, at least.
That's the key word.
One of the best players at your position. I think that's lost today. Like, I think you could be very, very good for a pretty long period of time, and that gets you in, but you're not dominant.
That's
there's this
key word, Dave. Dominant. That's the word I was looking for.
I would still say that even in certain areas, I would still say, even for people that are dominant, they still get lost in the shuffle just because of who they are. And I like for instance, one of my most wanted players was actually, Randy Gradishar. One, because I have my friend Ron over in Denver, huge Gradishar guy. You've probably seen him online, or I think you might have seen Ron Chappell, he's on Twitter a lot. He's a huge Gradishar guy, and he mentions how it's not just, you don't have to just look at the awards. You have to see how much of a commanding force he had on those Orange Crush teams in the 1970s, and you'll see that not only was he the heart and soul of those Orange Crush teams, but he was a guy that should have been in the Hall of Fame years ago. Absolutely.
I would not disagree with you. I would not disagree with you. And like I said, I'm not one of these guys that says this guy should be in, that guy should be in. Gradishar, the Broncos, the early 70s, mid 70s, they weren't a very good team. They were hardly ever on television in our area. And whenever they were on television, I always remember the PA announcer at Mile High Stadium. Gradishar on the tackle, Gradishar on the tackle, Gradishar on the tackle. Every tackle he was in on. And he gets overlooked.
I mean, Merlin Olsen said that he was one of the very best linebackers that he ever played against or even covered. Like, he said this years and years ago for Merlin Olsen, saying, back in I think the mid early 2000s, he said like his entire Wikipedia page, in terms of NFL legacy, he has a massive, literally I think at least 8 paragraphs explaining why he should be in the Hall of Fame, and just people just saying how he was the very, very best, the finest I've ever seen. Come on, guys! Especially with the increase of having 3 seniors. If Randy Gradishar is not one of those 3 men, I'll be okay if there's no Dilwig or Wister because they were older, but if you're going to have 3 people from seniors, Gradishar has to be one of them. And it better be, because in my own list, he was the only guy that was unanimous from all 15 of us. He was the only guy.
Well,
he was very, very – I don't have anything in front of me to pull up his – I can't look up his things, but he was – and there was a guy after him that was pretty good, and he was a key figure on that team for a pretty number – was Mecklenburg.
Mecklenburg,
Mecklenburg.
Lewis Wright's another one, but he was a secondary. He wasn't a linebacker. And talking about the Orange Crush members, like Mecklenburg came a bit afterwards. He was
Yes,
he was semifinalist. I think for like 8 straight years he was a semifinalist. I call that semifinalist purgatory, where you're just stuck there and there's no way getting up.
Well, before you came on, we were on, the three of us, Vinny, and they were asking me about. We were talking about Chuck Howley, who was a guy who played for the Cowboys. But of all the guys I look at, Cowboys, you could talk about maybe Ed Jones if you wanted to, or maybe there's a couple other guys they throw in there. But Chuck Howley, people forget, the guy was drafted in '58, I believe. And if you look him up, he lost a year. He was out. He tore up his knee. He was a first-round draft choice of the Bears. He didn't even know what the draft was. He goes, "What's that?" Somebody said. He said, "You got drafted to play professional football." Landry called him up, I think, in '61 and said, "You want to play football? You want to play football again?" The guy played for 13 more seasons. He's got like a lot of fumble recoveries. I think he was all pro, not Pro Bowl, all pro. I think 5 or 6 years.
Six years, if I recall. It was five first team from '66 to '70, and then he got a second teamer in 1971. He also had a year in 1970 where he was a first team All Pro, but missed the Pro Bowl.
How about he's got some intercept? He was the only guy named MVP from a losing Super Bowl team ever. Okay, he had big plays in the Super Bowl. He could have been, actually, Mark, if you want to get down to it, he could have been the MVP of Super Bowl VI.
That's true.
If you think about it. He had very good game that game. He had interceptions. He was a great athlete. He was a 5-sport letterman at West Virginia.
You would get along very well with my friend Paul. He just left again.
Yeah, we could do it.
Yeah, do you think that's a Randy White jersey, or is that a Chuck Howley jersey? That's a good question, because the Cowboys don't really retire their numbers ever.
It could be either or. It depends.
Yeah, I would assume it's a Randy White, because I assume that White's jerseys are much more readily available than that.
Custom made. Yeah.
I don't think it was slightly custom made too, or maybe it was one of those Chinese jerseys.
No, that was custom made in Canton. No, in Cooperstown. Cooperstown
made it?
Yep. There was this a woman he knew that had a shop in Cooperstown. He'll tell you the whole story. And she did custom made jerseys.
Going to Cooperstown, it was a real experience, because it was like I was stepping back in like the early 1900s, and because just how the stores were like, oh, yeah, is it working now, Dave? Is it working now?
I got knocked offline for some reason. Right off the internet, it said. Maybe they didn't like me talking about Chuck Howley.
No wonder why they're all against Chuck Howley now.
It's unbelievable. It's conspiracy against Howley, but he's in a wheelchair now, the guy.
Poor dude.
We're talking about there's a
Vinny, you might know. There's a woman down in Dallas. I can't think of her name. She's a sports writer. Oh, she's on NFL Network sometimes. She comes on with what's his name there, Florio, sometimes on his.
Oh, Shireen Williams.
Yeah, she's a big proponent. She's a big behind Chuck Howley. She's always, talking about Chuck Howley, but
and Paul Zimmerman.
I don't know.
Yeah, rest his soul, Dr.
Yep, Dr. Z.
Yeah, I can't believe he has a friend that knows about it. He said his friend is a big, Chuck Howley guy.
He's a huge. This is a guy, like Paul's a guy that is like at a Pro Football Hall of Fame canon guy. So around that, just forgetting his his Twitter handle, but he has like I think at least 250 helmets of signed Hall of Famers. Just signed Pro Football Hall of Fame helmets, signed by people from there. Like, even from people that you wouldn't even get, people that have been long dead, he has so many of them, because he would go there every single year, but the reason why he stopped going was just because of how pricey it was. But he said for Howley, if there's one person he's going to go there for, it's going to be him. And there's a whole thing that we're planning on trying to go in 2023 because we think Howley's going to be there. But going back to Howley, is that a Howley jersey, or is that a Randy White jersey?
It's actually a Randy White jersey. Yeah, he was a good friend of mine. We became pretty good friends. There was actually a shot with me. He was staying in a little hotel right outside of. He was signing something for me. That was right outside That was the town where they had used to have the hotel stuff that I was telling you about, the Park Hotel. He was staying. He gave me the address where he was staying. So we went down to meet him that day. Here's a couple, Mark. You'll know this guy. Tony
Dorsett. Tony Dorsett.
Yeah, I got those press passes on there, Arnie, in that picture. They're hanging around my neck, and I had my tripod there. And then here's another one, Mark. You'll know. There's me and Earl Campbell.
Oh, all right.
Earl Campbell. That's an old one.
And when Landry got in, I had some good seats right on the side. There's a picture of Tom Landry sitting down before he got up to the podium to speak.
That's a good picture right there.
There's a shot of Landry at the podium. I had some real good seats.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
We got there early. It was first come, first serve at the time. Wherever you landed. Here's me and Herb Adderley. You talk about a very nice guy. Very, very cordial. Here's Buck Buchanan, rest in peace. Buck Buchanan passed away. He was a tall guy. He was big. He was about 6'6".
Yeah,
Buck Buchanan.
How tall are you by comparison?
I'm 5'11", and he was towering over me. And he was and here's Willie Lanier, another part of that great Chiefs defense.
Yeah.
And Willie Lanier, actually, because we were going so often, he didn't know our names, but Willie Lanier got to know us by sight because we were there every year, me and my buddy Ray. And there's Ray Nitschke. So there's two of the greatest linebackers that ever played right there. Ray Nitschke and Willie Lanier. And here's another favorite. Mark, you'll like this one.
Oh, that's is that Dave Robinson?
No, it's not Dave Robinson.
I can't tell.
If Vinny gets this, I'll take a crap here.
Name.
Little further back, Mark. Couple of years before.
Did he play in the?
Night Train Lane. Is that Night Train?
I was going to say that. I was going to say he kind of looks like Lane. Like I just didn't know if it was Lane for sure because I was thinking Robinson, but like I was saying, he looks kind of big, so he could be linebacker, but I'm not entirely sure. But he has the Lane face, but I didn't say Lane yet, so I was thinking Night Train.
Yeah,
got to say that.
Yeah, he was. He had a very interesting. He was very hard to understand. You had to really hang on to everything he was saying. He had a very different. I'm not sure where he was from. But it was very thick, wherever
he's from Austin.
If you see interviews of him, you'll hear it. I think what's his name? George Plimpton once said, I really couldn't understand what he was saying. I'm not sure he knew what he was saying. He said, so that, that was taking a little, but he was a very nice guy. A lot of these Hall of Fame guys, especially these older guys, were really, really nice
very
guys.
humble.
I think the only guy that I ever had a bad experience was with Jack Lambert. Was kind of nasty with the little kids. He wouldn't sign anything. He said he had a very busy day the next day, and he blew everybody off. And he was. And George Blanda was cranky. He was kind of a cranky.
He always
guy.
looked like he was old, even when he was young.
Yeah.
George Blanda. He's right about that when he was playing, but. Like some of the guys would say, thanks for remembering.
Right.
Not even just other guys that played that might have been there for the festivities. They weren't Hall of Famers themselves, but my buddy he knew all the Raiders. And the guy said, geez, you got to be a big fan if you know me. This guy was a backup offensive lineman, George Bueller. And there was another guy too. I forgot his name. He was a monster. But these guys were just they played football. They were football players. They were nice guys. And they didn't think they were, I'm not too sure I would even want to meet a lot of the players today. As you get older, you just don't really.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But those guys were really, Ray Nitschke was a great guy right in the parking lot, just came right up. Willie Lanier was proud that we go up to him every year, but they were just great guys.
I'd love to. If some of them were alive today, I have no problem. The one that I want to personally meet the most is Charlie Trippi. Because in a century of living on this earth, you probably have a century's worth of stories to tell. And I would say for hours to listen to what Charlie Trippy has to say, simply because of just the stories you could tell. Like, I've always been fascinated by, especially people that get older and older. Like Bud Graney's 95 years old. Can you imagine the amount of stories you could say in just 95 years of being on this earth? Like, that's what I always look at. Like, one person I really, really wanted in, like, he was the one I was most excited here that made it this year. Art McNally, 96 years old. He's going to go in. He's going to be the oldest ever living inductee to ever get inducted. Can you imagine? Can you imagine for a second, 96 years old, you devoted your entire life to this game, and, death's knocking on your door and you're getting inducted. Like, can you imagine just the stories? Like, when I get there, probably assuming I get there, he's the one person I'm definitely going to try to search out for, because referees, listen, if you know anything about the game, especially now, people hate officials so much. I've seen downright near like death threats against these people just because they don't like a certain call. But for me, I'm the kind of person that wants to speak to that person. I want to speak to someone like Art McNally because of how influential he was on the entire profession of officiating. And I think it would be a huge honor to just speak with him.
How many playoffs and Super Bowls did this guy ref? There's got to be his name was around, seemed like it was around forever.
Well, it wasn't really that he was someone that I think it was like, not only including like football games, I think he officiated like at least 3,000 games in terms of like baseball and basketball and football. And if I recall, he was only like, he was a field judge and referee for like 1959. I think it was like 1967, if I'm recalled. But then he was also the head of officiating for many, many years. I think it was like after 67, like it was 1968 until 1990. That's when I believe Jerry Seaman took over. But he's the reason why he had, replay. And he was also responsible, like, all the grading systems that you see for every year. Like, a lot of people just think that, they just vote willy-nilly. No, they grade officials on how they do during those games with each game. And that is the evaluation and how they get better over time. But, even as a member, he was a part of the NFL, still with, the front office till 2008. And then he became an observer, and then he finally retired at the very ripe age of 86. Like, can you imagine, like, 86 years old and you retire finally? And the man's also a war hero too. He was a part of the Marines. That's just everything involved. That's why I would want to speak to him first, because it's just the stories you could tell that a lot of people don't really mention because they go to the player. But me, as a fan of the contributors, that's always going to be my most interesting story, how I would lead in.
A lot of those guys were, look, especially those World War II guys that came out of the war. Like, they talked about Landry. He flew 30 bombing missions over Europe. He lost a brother in World War II. And so when they came back, they asked him, like, I think it was Roy Firestone. I told you about this once before, Mark. And he says, what was that like? And he goes, well, the plane was going to go down, and I leaned over and I turned on the gas mixture and the engine started up again. He goes, and he was talking about it like it was nothing. Like he went up and scraped the windshield on his car in the winter, And so, I mean, they got involved with football, like these guys. And I think Chuck Bednarik might have been kind of from that era. I can't remember. But a lot of those Giants, a lot of the 59 Giants, that team there, a lot of those guys were, and just was a different breed of guy back then. It really was. It was a different, he mentioned McNally being in the Marines. That's what triggered that off. But, they were good. Art Donovan was like that. He had great stories.
You mentioned Art Donovan. His cousin was, I think she just died recently. She was in her 90s. His cousin, her name was Margaret. She was a parishioner at our church here. And she told me stories about, my cousin Artie. I said, what was he like in real life? She said, just the same way you see him on television. He always was telling funny stories. Yep.
It's a small world. Think of this woman being, in your church.
Yep. Artie Donovan's cousin.
It's unbelievable.
I think of like the men that, have played the game, and like Al Blozis, like he played for the Giants and, died in France during World War II. And that's someone that the PFRA, listed on their Hall of Very Good, just how dominant he was, even in his short time playing. And like, I think of other people that, died during war, like, Pat Tillman, he was killed by his own men. Then I think it was like Bob Kalsu, I believe it was.
Yes,
like he died in Vietnam.
Bills, right? Buffalo Bills.
Buffalo Bills. But I always was fascinated by those people that are still alive that were veterans during like World War II, because like people always talk about, History Channel will always mention, World War II, the Nazis, the Japanese, everything else. But I also would love to speak to the people that also fought on those lines. I don't know exactly if he fought in Japan. I don't know if he fought in like, Europe, but just speaking with him about it, it's best that you do it now, because chances are you're never going to have that opportunity again for the rest of your life. So it's best to try to reach out these people now, or their stories will be brought with them to their grave. And I don't want to see that happen. I want his story to be told to the whole world.
It's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just always been a bit. My grandfather fought in World War II. My other grandfather fought in the Korean War. So there is, when both of them died, they did have the American flag draped over them. They asked that they would be part of, a military, cemetery, and they said no. And my mom's side, he's buried in West Babylon, and for my dad's side, he's buried over in Farmingdale. With both of it, my mom's mom's still alive, but my dad's mom, she's buried alongside with him. She died like 20 years before he did, and she was 12 years younger than him. Those stories always interest me, because when you're always with those people that know they don't have much time left, or someone that have just recently passed, it's always best to honor them now and get their word out, get their story out before it is too late for anyone. And yeah, that's why I would love to speak with McNally. It's just everything involved.
Mm-hmm.
My dad was in World War II, not to keep going on the subject, but when you said about, and something, he never talked about it. He did. We knew he was on a Navy ship. There was a picture of all the guys on the ship with this dog. That's what he always talked about, the dog. And then we found out later, after he passed away, we found all these photographs with like the frilly edges on them, black and whites, and all these pictures they were all labeled on the back, Jap homes in Nagasaki. So he was in the Pacific. And it's exactly how it read too. That's exactly what it said on the back of them. And we never sat at the dinner table, and he never brought anything up, never, not even one time. And all the guys in our neighborhood were from that era. So there were other fathers that were from there. And there wasn't much talk about, there wasn't anywhere near the amount of stuff we talk about today, the veterans and all the stuff that these guys go through today with the PTSD and stuff. The guys just came back from the war. They got jobs. They all lived in kind of like the same neighborhoods, the jobs, and they all had like the same kind of houses, pretty much moderately built houses. And it was just kind of strange, the whole thing that, here was this guy, he's living in the house with you, and just was really not much, until he passed away and we found all that stuff. But it was just kind of weird, a little weird.
Why do you think that was the case? Why don't you think they didn't mention it? It was because, it was a much more quaint culture. It wasn't really outward. Like I would definitely say, even in today's time, we hear a lot about, helping military, families out, because, I do feel like sometimes people don't really appreciate the ones that truly do whatever they can to help others out. And, I know this, I was a Boy Scout. I got my Eagles, got the rank of Eagle. That's the highest you can get. And, we always had a big feature, always giving back to, the military men and women that put their lives forward and helping defend, fight others, because they love the people back at home. But at the same time, I always do wonder if there's ever any PTSD from those environments, like shooting people down, like what that could have on someone's effect. And, especially with recently, because I dealt with, Afghanistan, Iraq, we're going stuff with Ukraine right now. And it's always scary. I always wonder about what happens. Like, what's the emotional conflict that's going in to those, soldiers, and how is that going to be brought to their, family members years from now? And it kind of brings back with McNally, like, I don't think he really ever talked about it too, but I think it would be a really interesting story, and like, it would really be a nice feature. And, I would be involved. I'd be interested. You'd be interested. And like, maybe there's other people like him that probably don't talk about his times during the war that, say, there's not much time left. I think it's best that I finally give my story out. And unfortunately, neither grandparent ever really told me about their times in either of those wars, because my dad's dad died in 2004. My mom's dad died in 2007. So never got that chance, but I want other people to have that chance to finally say their piece.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the main reasons they don't like to talk about it, is that there's some horrific memories. I mean, to go through a war, and none of us knows what. Thankfully, none of us ever had to do that, and I would imagine some horrific memories that they don't want to. They try to put it out of their mind. They don't want to talk about it because it's just horrible.
Yeah, I can tell you firsthand, as someone like, even in my generation, like if you do like one bad thing, like they'll make sure you never forget it for the rest of your life. If you do, even if you're like you're a player, like they want to make sure that it almost feels like they don't want you to feel happy about any of your times. If you even do one bad thing, they want that to haunt you forever. But I will say that I am happy to an extent that a lot of these people do not mention that, because in this day and age, if they were to mention any bad things, the internet would not see them as friends. They would see them as pure foes and would just go after them. And I do not want that to be the case for any of these men that have risked their lives for that. I think that would be very disingenuous.
Right.
And yeah, even though I'm part of this generation, I am sad that other people don't mention this stuff. I am sad that I feel like I have to mention, someone like a Dillwig or this, because I think there's a whole lot of deepness and rich history that enough people don't really mention or really appreciate, because a lot of people just think about the here and now and say, oh, everything's the worst thing ever. Not really. It's just recency bias is clouding your mind, guys. Like, I never really felt truly embraced with even my own, generation. I mean, I have very similar humor, but in terms of appreciation of like, the greater good, I never truly liked it as much as even older generations. Because I will say, like, as much as you're big with, this and that, it feels like they let their anger get the best of them, and it just clouds what they want to do. And I think that's the case here. And I do, even though I'll be maybe small, I am happy that I am someone that does think different about it, because I don't think these people would really be interested in that kind of a story or that level of interest. Some probably would, but probably not many. So I'm willing to continue the legacy for them.
Right. Excellent. Well, maybe we should let Arnie go. Arnie, you still there?
He's still there. He's listening to us. just listening, just minding your own business and all.
Get out to that Hall of Fame there, Vinny. If you can get out during the week that they have the thing, get out there when they have the induction.
Oh.
It's you'll
I'll love it. Baseball, basketball, football, all of them. I'd be the first one to go up over there, like without a shadow of a doubt, because I'm big with this Hall of Fame stuff. Been with it for many years. Arnie would say I got into it in very, very weird ways, and I ain't getting off this train. Oh, hell no, bro. I'm staying on for the whole ride. I'm not getting off. I'm not backing down. That's how I am.
We used to love going out there. Those were great memories. My buddy Ray is still around. We talk about it, and we talk about how we corralled this guy and we corralled that guy. And that night with the Raiders, and we got all those guys in the lobby, we had like 35 or 36 things on the ball. And then we would go back. And it was, I think I went for Aikman and Rayfield Wright, Mark. I was there for that.
Rayfield Wright.
And I brought a guy with me. He's Kevin Parker. He's a local guy. He's a big Cowboy fan. He's an electrician. And so we drove out, and I'll tell you, we corralled a lot of other guys. You know who was it? Joe Avizano was there. We got him. He was the special team coach with the Cowboys when those 90s teams. We corralled Jay Novacek was there. We corralled him. And then we corralled, of all people, was this guy whose son made those figurines. I can't think of the name of them. They're Vinny, you might know. They're players. They're very detailed.
Oh, you mean the McFarlane figures?
McFarlane. We met his father. He was in a tent, and I saw the name on his shirt. This guy's got, and he said, "Yeah, that's my son." He says, and so I told him I was going on a trip.
The actual, the creator of Spawn, the legendary comic writer, Todd McFarlane. You actually saw Todd McFarlane there.
His father was selling the product. He was like running this little thing with the tent.
Oh, wow.
And he had all the figurines out. And I told him I was going up to Canada. I do a lot of nature photography.
Awesome.
And he said, when you're in Calgary, my number is in the book. Look me up. He was a very nice guy. We talked to him for about half an hour about the son with the figurines and everything.
He's from Todd McFarlane. He is from Calgary. He was a wonderful, Spider-Man. His most well-known character, in case you don't know, Venom. You know what Venom is. Tom Hardy. Back in the day, with Spider-Man 3, Topher Grace, and the animated series where it looked like he had like red and blue accents, like you had to put on the 3D glasses to see it. Legendary character.
Mark, that's out of our
I'm a big comics guy. My dad brought me. I like the old Avengers, Spider-Man comics. I have all that stuff, all the Batman and Superman, big with DC as well. Listen, that's in my blood. I'm gonna know that stuff off the top of my head. McFarlane as well.
You're running into these people you'd never run into. Like, we'd never meet that guy if we didn't go out there for that. But that was a good Hall of Fame trip. And just off the top of my head, I was thinking, and Madden was there. Madden got inducted in that same year with Aikman. And he gave a pretty good speech, Madden, And Al Davis was there for Madden, and he was very, very frail. I remember that. That was like one of the things that stuck out in my head. But you run into these people, and Bud Grant called it the finest family gathering he ever had when he got inducted into the Hall of Fame. I'll never forget that. He said that, but it's a good weekend. You go out there a day or two ahead so you could try to avoid the crowds and go into the Hall of Fame then so you could see it. Because once the festivities start, you'll never be able to get into the building. So if it's on a Wednesday, it's a Friday or something, end up going out like on a Wednesday and just get out there a day or two early and go through it then and then stay for the festivities. That's probably the best way to do it, The building is not that big. I mean, there's 3 buildings, I think, now, but still, it's just a lot of backup when you're trying to get in, and there's just so many people there because it's grown and it's so big now, the stadium. Wow. But they usually don't arrive until like Friday night. That's when they have that Hall of Fame jacket ceremony. And we were there one year, I remember, I'll never forget it, and my buddies are big 49er fans, but I used to tell them stories, and I said, one of the biggest guys I've ever Merlin Olsen was a very large man, but one of the biggest guys I ever used to see was Ed Jones. This guy was a monster, and he was
too tall,
and he still play. And I said, you guys, if you saw him in real life, you would see we're sitting there in front we're waiting for some of the guys to come out of the jacket thing, and this guy who we don't even know, he's walking down and he says, I just saw the biggest guy I ever saw. His name is Ed Jones. And I looked over at my 2 buddies, and they started laughing because they used to hear me talk about it all the time. And I said, I don't know what it was, but he had he wasn't just this large. He had a waist, not like these guys today. He had a waist, and he came up, and he was just, at 6'9". He was just a very large guy, probably 6'9". And when I was seeing him, it was a little after he got done playing football. He had put on a little weight. So I bet he was 285 pounds. That is a very big man.
I remember seeing this picture of him with these with these, these busty women, and like they were all like at the level of his chest almost, and he just towered over them. Like, man, is he a lucky guy or what? I was thinking of that image.
He's a guy you could make a claim for the Hall of Fame. He wasn't spectacular. He didn't have a lot of Pro Bowl years, but he batted down more passes, I bet you, than anybody that ever played the game. If they kept stats on that. And he was very, very, very good against the run. Mm-hmm. Probably in fact, Dan Dierdorf called him the best player he ever played.
Wow. That's high praise. Like I over around here, these parts of Long Island, there is someone that I hear more than anyone else, and I'm including Jets and Giants included. Who do you think I'm?
Joe Klecko.
Oh, hell yeah, Joe Klecko. You know I'm going to bring him up.
Joe Klecko, who you could definitely make a case for. The guy was an all-pro, I think, in 3 different positions.
John Hanna said the 2 hardest guys he had to go against was Howie Long and Joe Klecko. And, like, I think Joe DeLamielleure even said that he was the toughest guy he ever faced against. Like, you have all these people. I think, Gary Myers. Sorry, there's a flyer over there. Gary Myers would always be huge with, Joe Klecko. Like, my friends, like my friend Andrew, he said, like, my dad, all he talks about is Joe Klecko all the time. Like, my friend Mike's, his mom's a huge Jets fan. All he says is Joe Klecko, Joe Klecko. And I'm watching, like, old Adult Swim shows, and, like, they would have, like, just a random jersey of Joe Klecko on the wall. Like, yeah, he's huge.
There was a show called I forgot the name of it, but they were guys that were retired from football and they were boxing. You know what I'm talking about?
I think Mark? I remember. I don't remember watching.
Anyway, towards the end, it's got to be the guys got narrowed down as they were winning and losing, obviously. And one of the last fights was Randy White against Joe Klecko, and Randy White knocked him out. And it was I think it was strongman competition. Lawrence Taylor, who was absolutely out of his mind, he was announcing it. He must have been on he was like flying on this thing. And he was tremendous. He was doing some of the announcing, but that was on. You can find that on YouTube somewhere. That strongman show that was on. It was on for a couple of years. Gary Reasons was on it, and a couple of other Giant players were there. I think Otis Anderson was there. I know Gary Reasons for a fact. There was a couple other guys, but there was a lot of guys involved in it. It was kind of a crazy thing. They boxed for 3 rounds. And it was just wacky. But it was when he said Joe Klecko, and I mentioned it, but he was Joe Klecko. Look, that guy should have probably been in 15 years ago. And I'm not even.
That's
what I'm talking about.
Didn't he have a serious knee injury at one point? That kind of slowed him. I think that's when he got traded to the Colts.
Yeah, I think it was around that time. But when it comes to White and Klecko, I usually don't really think of the boxing stuff. I usually think of their Miller Lite commercial they had back in the days. That's what I mostly know of them together. Most of that Miller Lite commercial.
When they were in the fishing pool.
If you look him up, I think he was all pro at nose tackle, defensive end, and defensive
You are correct.
tackle. I think. I'm not sure. I think Klecko's
you
the
are
only
correct.
player.
I don't have to look that up at all. You are correct. He is the only guy. He was all pro defensive end. He led the league in sacks, which is insane. Led the league, the best nose tackle in the game, best defensive, like 3 distinct positions on the line, and he was the best at each one. It's like,
I don't know how. This is what I'm talking about. It's past some of the guys by. That's sin. That's kind of what
I agree.
When I'm talking about that.
My also with Gastineau, he was very much of a one trick. Well, he was like the way that one of my friends described is like, Gastineau was like the best, pass rusher of his, at least of his era. But whereas Gastineau was someone you'd throw the beer at, Klecko was the one you'd have the beer with. And Klecko, unlike Gastineau, was way more versatile. Not saying that Gastineau wasn't good at what he did. No, absolutely. He was absolutely fantastic. But Klecko was truly the man that was able to do well at everything and still put in just as much effort, if not more, at every single position. That's why I think Klecko should be in the Hall of Fame. Not just as someone who's from New York, not just someone who has heard many Jets fans over the years say they want Joe Klecko, but just because of just the versatility alone, I always like people, no matter what it is, that are good at one thing just as good as the next. Now, granted, if they're just all bad at it, that's one thing. But if they're all really good, great at it, that's even better. That makes it easier for me to choose that person. And I see for myself too, just like, I'm good at this.
He was tremendous, Klecko. Tremendous. And I'll tell you, speaking of you said you're a New York guy, one of the best Hall of Fame speeches, I think, was Curtis Martin's speech. He gave a great speech, Curtis Martin, and one of the worst I've ever heard, probably, of coming of all guys to prepare a terrible speech. As a man who was probably one of the most prepared players that ever played, Jerry Rice gave one of the worst Hall of Fame speeches I've ever heard. Look it up. It's horrible. I don't know what he was thinking, but it was just terrible.
Well,
it was just a very choppy speech. It was, but Curtis Martin's was very, very good.
Mm-hmm. When I think of like the best, like, fortunately, like for a lot of these guys, that their Hall of Fame speech, that's not just depending on whether or not you're going to make the Hall of Fame or not. Like that's more so dependent, like the reward of making the Hall of Fame is to say this speech, which granted has been cut down to time over. Like I know Brett Favre's speech and Ray Lewis's speech were gone for very long, but other people just turn away. And I'm like, I just stare right directly at it because I'm just so engaged with a lot of those very long, drawn-out speeches. Like, those bore others. I'm always much more engaged with those. And, like, other people might not be. I'm just different. I like long, drawn-out speeches. I can just sit there for just, minutes, just gasping and listen to what they have to say, their stories, because everyone's story is unique. And the way I see it here is, like, even with the Hall of Fame, so whether it's players, coaches, whoever, I'll be able to just say, oh, this person was in there for this one. No. I look at every single person individually because everyone has their own story and everyone played slightly different. And everyone got to where they are slightly different. And everyone created or contributed to something slightly different than another. Therefore, with every single individual person having their own unique story, that should also be the case with Hall of Famers. That's how I look at it.
So we hope you enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for listening. Along with Vinny, Dave, and myself, we thank you and God bless.
It was just another ordinary day in the offices of the Pittsburgh Guardian newspaper circa 1924. But for Marla Delft, assistant editor, everything was about to change. For she was about to discover the awesome attractiveness of Row 1 brand retro sports paraphernalia items thanks to Orville Mulligan, sports writer.
And there it is.
Wow, Orville, that's really the bee's knees.
Isn't it just? A poster-sized replica of the actual 1909 World Series program cover.
I can see that. But where did you get it? And where'd you get it framed?
I ordered it from the Row 1 website, where over 6,000 items of sports memorabilia from the 1880s to the 1990s are available for reproduction, in multiple sizes and in several different materials, with over a dozen styles of frame to choose from for prints like this.
Well, I'm sure Mr. Delft would love to put up more of these in the office. But I'm equally as sure they're beyond this newspaper's budget.
Not at all, my dear Marla. See for yourself. Go to sportshistorynetwork.com/row1.
sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. Oh my, these are good prices. Oh, and look at this stuff. Oklahoma-Nebraska football, college basketball art, Michael Jordan items.
And so
retro
it was that
sports
Marla Delft
advertisement
discovered the
flowers.
splendiferous magic of Row 1 sports memorabilia, arts, and prints. You can too by visiting sportshistorynetwork.com/row1. That's ROW1 today for access to the full Row 1 catalog of gallery prints and gifts like t-shirts, long-sleeve shirts, telephone cases, coffee mugs, blankets, pillows, towels, and even shower curtains. Act today for 15% discount off all prints with coupon code SHN15 and 20% off all other items with coupon code SHN20 at checkout. And keep your dial locked to the Sports History Network for the exciting chronicles of the 1920 sports world in Orville Mulligan, sports writer. Coming soon.